this is this. So when I was arrested, and the U.S. attorney told me that he wasn't going to prosecute me, but if he ever heard again that I was bringing this tea in or doing a ceremony, he was coming to get me. That's what he said. And I thought, okay, let's see what's going to happen. Because my path, right? It's my religion. I consider this my religion. But so it may very well be that some people are going to have to do this anyway. The advantage, though, is because the holding space in Oregon is a law that actually makes what you're doing legal, right? You're asking for a nuance. You're saying, hey, so the use of psilocybin was made legal, and we're saying this is just an expression of the intention of that law. What we had to do was we had to come up against, right, the government that said, you know, this tiny amount of what is in your tea is a Schedule I substance. Therefore, you are absolutely refused to, you know what I mean? So we had to do a thing, I think, against something that was more locked than the Oregon situation, I think gives, you know, and Nicole, you'd have to weigh in on that, but I think you at least have a holding space of that the thing is basically legal. And if this committee says, no, we can't do it, you're saying, well, we need an improvement on what is, and maybe we have to go to court to do that. So I actually think it would be very optimistic. I think the whole thing is optimistic, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, thank you. I do too. And I think in a way, this is a strange conversation to be having because, you know, and I think in the history of psychedelics and the legalization of them in the United States, I say religion got there before therapy got there. And there's a reason for that. You know, there's a reason why we have extensive litigation for religious practitioners and, you know, multiple cases at federal appellate court levels. But I've only heard recently of very few, like, thank you, Kathleen Tucker and Emerge Law Group for your right to try litigation. But, you know, there's the idea of litigating and a legal right to kind of a therapeutic use of psilocybin is really a very recent concept, whereas a religious right to do it really dates back for as long as we've known about psychedelics, really. And so it's kind of, as Oregon's program isn't medical and it's not even per se therapeutic, it also could include adult use or recreational psilocybin. It's like if there are people who are taking this with absolute, you know, sincerity and are taking this not just as a fun thing to do or just like a nice, just to have a good day, but to have kind of a divine encounter or something that's just really kind of revelatory. Why wouldn't we kind of recognize that that is the longstanding existing use that has already kind of been established, you know, clearly in case law, you know, within our nation. So to me, it only makes sense if we're going to have like a recreational program. Why wouldn't we give special rights and privileges to religious operators who work under the same program? It's just kind of, to my thinking, kind of just a no-brainer. But you know, this conversations, this matter is far from over yet. This is definitely not guaranteed that this law will pass. And I appreciate very much, Nicole, your comments that this is, even just to have this conversation is in itself kind of an achievement that we've gotten this far. And, you know, we've come to kind of describe what it is we do and why it is that that's not a thing that people should be afraid of necessarily. I think the thing that I really want to impress upon Oregon rulemakers as they're weighing through these issues is that these communities are already safely doing this and have been doing it safely long before there was an Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, long before there was a state of Oregon or a nation of the United States. long, this stuff predates all of us, large by thousands of years. And to then kind of artificially say this can only happen in a top-down therapeutic model is just kind of, it's just kind of ludicrous. So that's my spiel here. Yeah, Jody.
It's just such an amazing experience to be able to sit with so many experienced practitioners and people that have, been doing this for a long time and have a passion for the spiritual path of awakening and consciousness and the benefit of mystical experience. I just wanted to add a little bit that, in the beginning, I was a psychotherapist, a counselor, licensed counselor, running a trauma center with a focus on treating traumatic stress and addiction. I had wanted to become a therapist because of the early research on LSD and the cure rates for alcoholism, and the reports about psychedelics and the potential for helping people heal. And then it was made illegal, before I finished my study and got to the point of having a practice, but I never forgot about it. And, over the years, some of my clients, who were probably in the thousands, did experiment, and they did have vastly different outcomes in their treatment because they were desperate and looking for something else because the treatment wasn't helping. We have that situation right now with alcohol addiction, opioid addiction, meth addiction. The overdose rates are, every year going up so extreme. And it was way back when the big book came out, when AA was founded in the 1950s, when Bill W., the founder of AA, said, without a spiritual experience, you won't get free of it. That it requires, it's in the big book, they follow the big book in AA, they must have a spiritual experience. It's the only thing that will stop it, because that's what they were witnessing. And he himself had a spiritual experience. And then later in the 60s, he would go on to experiment with LSD, in which he had his burst of light experience and realized, I am not an alcoholic anymore. I'm not that, he had the great realization, we call it, who the self really is, who's going through these experiences. It's not, don't identify, so much with what's happening to you, find out who you really are. And that has been the standard in alcohol treatment, that people have to have spiritual experience. Of course, the systems they came up with to try to make that happen are awkward and outdated, and they're not effective. AA runs between a 5% and 35% success rate, which is really a massive failure rate. Addiction treatment center, same thing. The revolving door in and out of treatment, relapse happening constantly. But now on the other side, being a mystical practitioner, leaving the clinical world and really coming into the realm of consciousness, the real source of everything, forget the neuroses and everything else. If you get that, that's the cure. And so the seeing where we're at with this initiative and with the process, and now this other report coming out last week from the Beckley Foundation saying, oh gosh, the mystical experience is what makes the depression go away. We could have told them that. We all could have told them that. But thank God they have the research now. They've proven it. And I can only hope that they continue to explore the vast amount of clinical mention and research and the work of Carl Jung and all the studies on consciousness and all the teachings of the great philosophers of consciousness. It doesn't have to be religious, or we don't have to call it spiritual. We know now it's a neurological effect. When the brain changes, we have an enlightenment experience, or when we have an enlightenment experience, the brain changes. And when the brain changes, we become the real self, and we experience happiness and bliss and centeredness and peace and unity, and the suffering stops. So with us holding this knowledge base and that intersection, of the the early leaders in addiction trying to get rid of addiction, which is such a hard issue because it's an entrenched brain disorder. But now we have the way forward. And I think entheogenic practice is vital. They're talking about bringing people in to train psychiatry, how to incorporate spirituality. Good luck. First of all, we have to get out of the sterile room with the white coats and go out in nature and get some of the sun and the sky and each other. And I having facilitated a lot of experiences over the past 35 years, I'm really curious to see how they're going to train these therapists to handle some of the natural things that awaken when people are, in that liberated state of consciousness. I know how we handle it, but I don't know how they're going to handle it. And I think we can help them. And I hope that they'll open the door and just say, hey, there's a lot of people that have experience and knowledge and wisdom, and we should give them that grandmothering, that grandparenting, grandfathering, bring us in and let us show you what we've been holding on to all these years.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. I want to come back to something that Nicole had said earlier about this project, which is that, this is kind of, everyone knows this, but Oregon is the first place to do this. And I really am really concerned that if kind of spiritual practice isn't protected under Measure 109, that all the other states that follow, will follow Oregon's example of kind of relegating spiritual and religious use to the sidelines, and having it be, we just had I think probably many of you are aware of the article that just came out in Vice about conflicts of interest at the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, and in my earlier presentation to the board, the licensing subcommittee in early February, there's a long list. I think it's probably over 30 companies now that are publicly traded who work in psychedelics that are kind of solely focused on psychedelics. And none of this is even really legal yet. And there's already $4.8 billion of industry around something that's not even legal yet. And as time goes on and the Oregon model gets exported to more and more places, I think it's just inevitable that this thing that I'm kind of calling the psychedelics industrial complex is going to become more and more entrenched, and it's going to make it harder and harder to have these low-cost pathways to service that are really, devoid of profit motive and are dedicated to just helping and healing people and giving them kind of spiritual experience. I think when the kind of the intersection between money and psychedelics is one that I think many of us just have a great kind of misgiving around on some level. And I think by allowing entheogenic practitioners to have kind of their program and their community that keeps as much money out of it as they want to, it's not saying that they can't bring money into it, but I think by protecting sacred practice, we really set up a safeguard against kind of corporate takeover of psychedelics. And I think it's Oregon's example here is going to have ripple effects beyond, I think, what anybody really realizes. And I'm just highly concerned that even within Oregon, a small state of only 4.6 million people, we're already seeing these conflicts of interest problems kind of arise and potentially even corrupt the process. So, when you add to that, like a much bigger state, like once California comes on, there's a lot more money in California. There's plenty of money in Oregon for sure to corrupt things, but just as this sector or this landscape of psychedelic healing gets bigger and bigger and more players added to it, I just think we have to carve out space for sacred practice to make sure that it doesn't just get subsumed into profit motive. So that's one of the things that really concerns me the most about this. Like, not only do we need to protect spiritual practice, but spiritual practice hangs in like this delicate state right now, as I see it, where we're seeing aggressive tactics from some of these companies that are trying to patent things like holding hands and using soft furniture and gentle lighting and relaxing music in psilocybin sessions. And it's just, you know, what does that bode for our future unless we take some kind of action to, you know, now to show that, you know, this is a people's medicine. Just like Measure 109 is a people's law that was passed not by legislators, it was passed by a vote of the people. So I think, you know, my call is, you know, we as people have to stand up and say that this is not the psychedelic program that we want. This is not the one that we want to, you know, we can do better, you know, plainly. And I think, to my thinking, that starts with protecting sacred practice. You know, and then, you know, and then on the therapy side, if they want to have it highly regulated with, I mean, I just think that the problem here is that I think the people on the board I was talking to someone on this panel recently who said that everyone on the board has advanced degrees in psychology or medicine, I think with very few exceptions. I think that's like maybe one or two people who don't. And so people who have those professional backgrounds and biases are the ones that are writing the rules. So I think we just have to kind of tip the scales and show that there's a lot of ways this can be done. And a lot of, and that many of those ways, in fact, the ways that we are promoting here are safe and beneficial. And that this is just how we have to do it. So who wants to go next?
I want to just add to what you're saying, John, that also speaks to the part of your proposal that the people responsible for training people are the people, right? In other words, I can't imagine a scenario where, and it's not going to happen to us, but I can't imagine any of you all doing this, where these people on the board are going to decide who's to train your people to come and be in your ceremonies. To do what? You know, so I think that it also speaks well to that. And I'm thinking, and I imagine, you know, you're a lawyer, you got lawyers, you're thinking this too. Everything you're doing now is to show that you have done your diligence, you are showing that it's safe, you're showing how it's safe, you're showing how it's done, so that in that unfortunate but possible eventuality that you have to go and demonstrate that to a court, you've done your diligence. I mean, that's what we did. When we got to court, right? We're about to celebrate, by the way, in April, 13 years from when we liberated our practice. Yeah. And when we went, we had to show we took care of the sacrament, we took care of people, we took care of our money, and we were part of a lineage. Those were the four things that we had to show. We had a history, we knew what we were doing, we had taken care of it for years, right? And we were way more interested in a lack of diversion than the government was, right? Those were the four things that we had to show. And we had done it by years of documentation, right? We went to court in 2009, and we had been operating since 1993 with paperwork, who came and how we did it and how many times we did it. We had documented all that for those decades because we knew that eventually we were going to have to go and show that to somebody.
John, I just want to add another comment. I want to second everything you said. I completely agree. That's also one of my biggest worries. And this there's also a dimension of equity, and I'm going to bring this up simply because there is an equity subcommittee that is supposed to inform this whole process. And initially, and this, I think, continues to be the spirit of those who created the advisory board, The equity subcommittee is supposed to link with all other subcommittees and sort of bring the perspective of equity to everything that is being done within the, that clinical framework. But one of the dimensions of equity that has been missed in the discussion is the equity around religiosity and spirituality. It's just have been absent from the discussion, and we have to bring it in now, like in the next week or two, because otherwise it's going to be too late. So that's one point. The other one is that since to me, this is more about advocating for diversity in terms of how to practice religion and really protecting religious freedom. Working with psilocybin doesn't have the form of a church necessarily. People can make churches, but how each of one is going to practice with it is going to be different. And I think that diversity should be protected. We have different lineages, we have different connections with different groups of people in different parts of the world. That needs to be protected. And it also, there needs to be protection for what's emerging that is new. We also have a right to create spiritual practices here and now for those who are inhabiting this planet right now. So we need to protect our right to do that. We can't have these venture capitalists invading this aspect of our lives. I mean, that's corrupt to me. So I'm wondering, and since, as you have said, there are so many conflicts of interest. And to me, the sad part about this is that the conflicts of interest are kind of there, and they get away with it. It's like now nobody's doing anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if one says this is a conflict of interest, if one says what's the problem with this. Nobody wants to talk about it, and they just, things keep as if it's not there. So I am thinking in terms of advocacies. I think it's necessary that not only, that this proposal, like you said, is presented to the licensing board and the equity subcommittee, the licensing subcommittee and the equity subcommittee, but also that the people who are here and who care about this also perhaps write to the OHA and, in support of this proposal. And, also with concern about what's going on. It's not, I don't think at this point it's enough to do it at the subcommittee level. I think there has to be a stronger voice and different voices coming from different places.
Thank you so much, Pilar. That reminds me of I've talked to a lot of people about the proposal, and one of the things I've heard pushback on is that it doesn't go far enough, in part because of the constraints imposed by the measure itself. And to that, I respond that I think clearly some kind of screening process needs to happen, and I don't think that the proposal would avoid screening or would result in unsafe screening or anything like that. I think if anything, spiritual communities, because this is spiritual practice, they may take it more even serious than somebody who's doing it for a different type of practice. But that might be my personal bias, but I think that this is really, I think sincere spiritual practitioners who operate under the measure are not going to need their hands held and told how to look after client safety largely. I think they're going to do that on their own because that's just what they're going to do. And it's what they're already doing. And so I just think that the state really ought to invite those people who are practicing with psilocybin in a respectful and sincere and entheogenic kind of spiritual or religious way, invite that use into the program so that there can actually be more safeguards added in place. I think that there's a lot of danger in underground practice. For those who've been following the podcast cover story, they're going into shocking detail for a lot of people about some of the perils of underground practice and how people get abused. There's And with if we invite entheogenic practice above ground within the context of Measure 109, it provides robust oversight and accountability. People will still have to probably pay a significant amount of money for licensure to get their service center or their manufacturing operation up and running. And to lose that permanently because a behavior responsible is a significant detriment. It's a significant disincentive, and I think it's probably just enough. I mean, I don't even think you'd need a disincentive other than like people getting harmed. I think these communities are looking after their community members, but I think there's just a concern that if we don't regulate it enough or tightly enough, that people are gonna it's gonna result in harm all over the place. And I just haven't really, in all of my kind of travels in this area with meeting people, I just find them, like everyone on this panel today, just like sincere, good people who, want the best and want, their communities to have, profound, life-changing experiences. So I think, does anybody have any closing thoughts before we switch gears to public question and answer?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute to just kind of address the couple points about, when we say venture capital and we say corporate takeover, what we really mean by those things is that we don't want profit only, profit first, exponential return on investment in a short period of time models for psychedelic therapy and theogenic practice, whatever we want to call it. That's really what we're all pointing to. And I just want to emphasize the point that the way that we do that is to require in every decriminalization law, every law that purports to legalize or regulate, but even decriminalize. And I have to emphasize the point about decriminalize, because even though a law is not set to regulate and set up a regulatory and licensing framework, we need to be saying, even in those laws that liberalize possession, we need to be saying, in the future, when we have these business models, they must have public benefits as a requirement, and or they must be in a measure stewarding the practices, the communities, the stakeholders from which this knowledge comes, from which this wisdom comes, but also that are already being impacted, right? These are just the externalities that we ignore in an extractive capitalist model, but those really need to be recognized and emphasized. And this is the last thing I'll say about it. I know you want to get to questions, but there are efforts underway to create a sort of a scorecard where businesses that want to get into the business of commercializing psychedelics need to meet a certain rubric that addresses environmental, social, indigenous reciprocity, and really is a net positive on society, and not one that just extracts for the benefit of those high net worth individuals that contributed capital to the beginning, to the enterprise at the beginning. And so I hope that all who are listening here really see that as a call to action, that in every state and in every law that we move forward with from this point forward, there have to be these requirements that the business models reflect the wisdom that we know is true from our experience with psychedelics, and why they're actually, why they work. I love, Jyoti, when you said, yeah, the depression goes away because of the spiritual experience. Like, yeah, we all know that's true. And so if that's true, then let's do this differently as we, bring them to mass market. And then the last sort of just a last little point there in terms of, I just perused quickly the conflicts of interest article that somebody put up. And, in a word, if the business models were set up in a way where those who had voting were not those who had the economic interest, but that your economic interest was sort of separated out, and those who are stewarding the actual public benefit of the company are the only ones who get to vote and don't have economic rights. This is the whole revolutionary concept of purpose economy and what they're really, how they're trying to change, really to change the face of our economy and the way that businesses operate. That would address many of these conflict of interest rules. You don't get to vote if you have an economic right, or your economic rights are balanced with reinvestment in the public benefit. So there are lots of ways of addressing the issues that you're all speaking to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and I don't mean to suggest that all companies who do business for profit in the psychedelic ecosystem are like heinous, horrible people or anything like that. I think it's just kind of, in some ways, a few bad apples, like often happens. It kind of give the whole, many folks a bad name. And I think there's plenty of really great companies that are doing this in an ethical way with a eye towards kind of this industry being equitable, for decades to come. But it's just like, how do we?
It's not, yeah, and it's really not about demonizing anyone. I mean, the fact of the matter is that whether it really isn't that there's, this like cabal of big money getting together in rooms, although that does happen, to be talking about like, how are we going to take this all over? It's not really that coordinated. It's just that all of the incentives and the structures that already exist about how corporations operate, about how corporate law functions, like they all just sort of funnel businesses into this status quo way of operating. And so unless we change those structures, we're going to end up with the same results over and over again, whether we intend to or not, and whether the people who start the businesses are well-intentioned or not. There's a great, if you go to, we call it Paula, is a great kind of dystopian narrative that walks through exactly the very well-intentioned psychedelic facilitator who starts her own tiny clinic, and how she ends up at the end, after taking on a bunch of venture capital money, where the mission of the organization ends up at the end, and how very distraught this, the character in this story is. So it's not about bad or good people. It's about bad extractive models.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Okay, with that, I think we might switch gears here to public questions. So we have a question from Jonathan Mink. What are the regulations on ceremonies concerning groups, patient to practitioner, one-on-one only? So I think I can answer that one. Essentially, there's been a recommendation from the licensing subcommittee that group. So first off, it's presumed that I should say, that group sessions will be allowed. There was a full board recommendation back in, I believe, late November about having group training be required for all facilitators who go through the program. And so that passed unanimously by the board, and everyone seemed to be in agreement that if they're going to train it, then we assume that they'll allow it. But that, I guess, technically that's not fully decided yet. Then, so the question is how many facilitators will have to be there. And, I think that currently OHA is inclined to want to turn it into a fixed ratio, meaning that I think the earlier recommendation was that for every 3 clients, there'd have to be 1 facilitator, which is a lot. And I think there was an amendment of that recommendation months later that for regular dosing, meaning non-microdosing sessions, that it be a ratio of 8 to 1, which provides more flexibility. And I want to emphasize that that doesn't mean that every group should always use 8 to 1. 8 to 1 might not make sense for a lot of people or a lot of reasons. But within this context, within the entheogenic practitioner context, it gives communities the ability to kind of navigate that with a little more flexibility. And then with the microdosing, they have it as 10 to 1 as the recommendation. And that's just from the licensing subcommittee. And those issues haven't actually been picked up by the full board yet, although I'm sure we'll see some fireworks on that in the next 3 or 4 months as the board hastily kind of addresses all the loose ends that they need to wrap up on. There is a question from Guy. There's a
It's
mention.
like, what you're talking about, John, it's like daycare,
Mm,
3-1. We have to make sure that, right?
yeah, it's just like, it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of money. You know, and if people are paying $40 an hour, I mean, that's 100, even if you spread that $40 an hour for 6 hours over 3 people, that's still a lot of money. So yeah, and probably largely unnecessary for many communities. There's a mention, a guy asks, there's a mention of the spiritual communities being able to define the training criteria for their certified practitioners. Can you provide an example of what that training and certification might look like? Thank you, Guy. That is an excellent question, very specific to the details of the proposal. So as Jonathan was mentioning, Jonathan Goldman earlier, I think that was in this conversation, although we've had a few now, and thank you, they're always really excellent. So thank you, Jonathan, for your wealth of experience you bring into these conversations. That you all use guardians, and your guardians go through an internal certification process. That when you decide that they're ready, that they are, you permit them to serve in a more kind of hands-on role to help oversee ceremony. So the proposal kind of, in some ways, it was inspired by that, and it gives communities their own kind of ability to certify community members as being able to work in peer support, which includes harm reduction, to try to drive down the facilitator-client ratio, and also to just provide more autonomy to communities. And so I've tried to draft it flexibly in case this notion made the Oregon Health Authority very uncomfortable. They would have the option to impose some rules that could kind of drive that certification process. And the one that I think like it would make the most sense if the state were to do that, and I don't necessarily suggest that they should, is that they could say that before a community is going to certify a member to provide peer support, they could have to be involved with the community for a certain amount of time or number of ceremonies, that they could have some kind of minimum amount of relationship with the community before they start kind of serving in a leadership role. I don't think that would be
John, what you're talking
onerous
about,
if it were done.
what you're talking about is rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right?
Hmm.
That's what you're talking about. Look, and I made a joke earlier, but the truth is the ratio of helpers to participants is actually quite, we have lots of helpers in our ceremonies. We're about to do this weekend, we're about to do 3 ceremonies in a row, and we'll have 25 to 30 participants, and we will have somewhere around 8 to 10 staff. Because we have people who are musicians, and we have people who are leaders, and we have people who are called, as you said, guardians. We use an apprenticeship system, right? In other words, people who've been doing it for a while will take on people, and those people have a limited responsibility until they are assessed to be ready to then take on a more. And it works very well. And how long that takes, as I said to you, how long that takes depends on the person. You know, there are some people who have a facility and can get it quicker, and some people need time to become comfortable with how do you help someone who's going through someone? How do you non-intervene but intervene? Right? How do you hold the space? Well, it's a whole way that we do it. And as I said, it takes as much time as it takes. The assumption needs to be on the part of the people who are overseeing this is We are the ones that want to keep people safe. I want people to be safe much more, right? The people who are the professional people on the board, what they want is that it doesn't blow back on them, right? That's what bureaucrats want. Don't blow it back on me. I want to make sure that I don't get in trouble. I want people to have a good experience. I want people to be safe. So of course we're going to train people who and not have them do stuff before they're ready, for them and also for the participants. You see, so we're reversing, and I think the essence of your proposal is we need to trust that the people who are doing this work are sincere, are deeply committed, and want what's best for everybody. Okay, so then how can the bureaucrats help that? And what do rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's? What do you need to know? So if you need to know that a person has participated in an X number of ceremonies, okay. You know, our criteria is, can the person do the multi-level multitasking that they need to do? Do they know how to hold a space while giving people space, but also, you know, keeping them secure? You know, it's a little more abstract, but it's a very grounded thing, because as I said, we want people to be safe, more just like the thing with the diversion as the government calls it, right? I don't want people to be, I'm not going to be giving out my sacrament to people just to hang out and have fun, right? I have a greater interest in it, in both those things, than any government agency. And so the people who are making these, given the responsibility of making those regulations, would be well served to really trust that as their assumption. Now let's talk about what works.
Thank you for that. John, the first question that came in, I'm going to introduce this one. And Jyoti, this is for you to discuss. Prima Sagara put this one in about testing. So there's this really big discussion about should the government have its hands on sacrament in between production and ingestion or use. And this is a really complicated topic. And I would love to hear, Jyotima, your organization's opinion on this topic.
Yeah, well, you know, Prema's our alchemist at Enlightened Life Temple and our vice president, and an experienced herbalist with lots of, you know, knowledge of the biology and genetics of many different natural plants that are healing, including psilocybin. The most important thing is, you know, we don't want our plants to be around unconscious energy. So anyone who grows our mushrooms, we believe they are living beings. We believe they are beings of consciousness that exist on the earth as sacred allies for us, for healing and for awakening. And so we would grow them according to our spiritual traditions, and we would attune them in specific ways throughout their growing process so that we would have a variety of vibrational products at the end, that each one attuned to a different frequency or a different, we would call it a different state of consciousness that we might experience, because they're very absorbent. They take on the energy that's around them. And so we have very specific, deliberate methods that we use for those attunement processes while they're growing, and we use symbolism and ritual and chanting and all of that. Then when we bring them out to be prepared, you must be an experienced practitioner in order to handle them. And even for testing, we are talking about, you know, setting up our own lab so that our plants do not leave our energy field, and they're never thrown unconsciously in a bag and their bodies cut into without, proper ceremony and permission and communication with the plants. And I mean, to us, it would be like if we sent one of our members to a lab and they said, oh, we're just going to cut off a piece of your finger and, see what you're made of, or if you have any contamination. We wouldn't do that to these sacred members of our community, who are our medicine and our sacrament. So we have ways that we interact with them during that process, and to keep the frequency. And even if we have a member of our temple, but they don't have the practitioner training, or they haven't reached that particular level, we have sort of, a system of levels of initiation in our organization, then they wouldn't be allowed to be around the plants. At the same time, we want to grow them also in proximity to our ceremonial area, because we want their presence. Even just to be in their presence, people have effects. Some people just put them under their pillow and they have effects. So they're very potent, especially the way we have, interacted with them from the beginning. And so the idea to send them out for testing is not plausible. It doesn't work for us. I mean, we just don't, and then we buy them back from a center and we don't know what has happened to them. We're disconnected from them. So being able to grow our own psilocybin mushrooms, and we also would like to innovate and work with varying genetics and varying, combinations to see if we can refine all of the essential elements that are in there besides the psilocin, that we haven't yet studied, that haven't been brought forward. So that's something we feel like we could do in a spiritual partnership with the plant, not that we would treat the plant as an object. So those are some of our concerns around testing. And I know that other entheogenic traditions have shared with us the same concerns. They don't, I think our testing and our growing and our ceremonial areas all need to be in-house. That's our position on that.
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
I was just going to say that's incredible, and I think for as many communities that won't have the financial means to do their own testing, their only chance is to, possibly send them off to the lowest cost testing facility that they can do to keep their costs low. And
I want to tell you, today we had a meeting and Prema was saying, if we do invest in making a sacred lab to do the testing in a sacred way, then we would offer that service, and any other practitioners that might like to have a product to offer the public could be assured that, our laboratory testing processes would be in harmony with the sacredness of the plants, for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so let's see, we've got more questions.
Pick a winner here. And we're not going to be able to get to all of these tonight. John and I will discuss how to get them all answered though later.
And before we get to another question, I just want to quickly give a plug. A group of us in Oregon has tentatively formed an organization called the Entheogenic Practitioners Council of Oregon. It's a place, since there's so many Oregonians on this call, a place for folks to come together and talk about these things. And there's probably, more power that we have as people when we come together. And, we think that just educating on these issues is just really critically needed right now. And so we think the time is short, but it's a good time to kind of move forward in promoting this in Oregon. And I've been approached by a number of other people who want to be a part of it, who don't live or practice in Oregon. And we're trying to keep this a local organization, a local effort, because we think there's integrity in local organizations. There can be integrity in any organization, but that there's something special about just keeping it to Oregon, where it's our community that's kind of advocating along on Oregon law. So Joe, do you have a final question that you thought was important to, or does yeah.
I don't. I'll pick one though. Probably the first one. So from Dancing Clips. So 109 doesn't allow cannabis use along with psilocybin. Can John, your proposal be used as a gateway towards dual use? There was a recent study referenced here from Imperial College London. You know, majority of the times I've used psilocybin mushrooms, I've also used cannabis. And I don't know, I'll let you take that or anybody else.
Yeah, so under the measure, a facilitator is not allowed to participate in a person taking psilocybin if they are visibly intoxicated, I think is the wording of the measure. And of course, visibly intoxicated isn't defined, but I presume that it will ultimately mean if a person already appears to be under the influence of alcohol, cannabis, or a controlled substance, that they will, that the law itself, which is again not the regulations, it's the law that regulations can't, that's one of these pillars of non-negotiables that we can't work around, would likely say that they're not allowed. I think that might just be a little, you know, like the hard thing about these, you know, advocating for something is it has to be something that's still palatable and that doesn't make people too uncomfortable. And honestly, politically, I don't know if we're yet to the point. I mean, I would love it if we were, but you know, I'm not sure if we were to advocate for that, how Oregon. I definitely encourage you to comment on it because I think it is important. I think we'll get there eventually, but I just think it's not even at the federal level has there been a multi-sacrament church that's been kind of that where a courts upheld the right for the church to use multiple like entheogenic sacraments. So that it's like the current legal thinking just hasn't evolved to cover that yet. Although I know there's people who are kind of planning up lawsuits to file to try to test that. And I think they'll ultimately be successful. But unfortunately, given the parameters of the measure, I don't think there's really a pathway for that within the context of Measure 109. So until we get a legislative change somehow or a statute change, I think we're probably limited just to psilocybin.
Well, thank you, John. And maybe if people feel like they have time, just a quick reference to your organization, any links you want to put out, and we can go from there. Jyotima, can we start with you? Like, where can people find information about your work and organization?
I'm going to give you a couple of links here in the chat box. My nonprofit organization is called Enlightened Life Temple, and it's at enlightenedlife.org. Enlightened, like it already happened, right? And you can read about my spiritual journey and the development of our temple and how it was founded. And you won't find on that site, I'll put it in there too, any information about our psychedelic practice. Those things are reserved for our members and for our initiates. And it hasn't been a good idea to put any of that out there in the public arena all these years. And I'm still not sure that I will put our nonprofit out there, you know, under this proposal. I have some concerns on the nonprofit piece of it, just because of, you know, the IRS is so difficult and we've had that protection for so long, and I don't want to put 28 years of work at risk. And so, you know, I'm contemplating and talking to various people about that right now. Our Linktree address is there. It's under Nexus Awareness. That's links to all important articles. Some of the research that I talked about, the links are there. For Mahashivaratri, there's the Shiva Tandava Stotram, which is an amazing psychedelic video with the singing of the traditional Shiva Stotram for Mahashivaratri. So I've enjoyed that if you go there. And then there's links to all of the various meetings and things that I'm offering now as I get ready to move toward figuring out how to open something or offer something when the program comes online. We have a very active meetup group. If you just look for Nexus Center for Consciousness, there's a lot of different stuff going on there. And yeah, I want to mention one of our meetups coming up in March on the 18th, I think it is. It is Oregon Psilocybin Mentoring Group. So anyone who mentors people or coaches people or facilitates or helps, you're welcome to join. And we're going to try to create some community support for the new people that want to get involved so that we have some voices of wisdom for them. Thanks.
Thank you. How about you, Nicole? Could you go next?
Sure. So I'm going to put in the chat, check out northstar.guide. Anyone who is purporting to form any sort of business endeavor in psychedelics, please go to northstar.guide and get involved there. The other is the Psychedelic Bar Association at the psychedelicbar.org. And what I want to say about that is if you are a lawyer, you should ask yourself why you are not yet a psychedelic lawyer. And if you are a client, ask your lawyer, are you a member of the Psychedelic Bar Association? Because here, I'm putting this in the chat. I will, when I figure out how to do it, is that we're in the middle of getting our website up, so I can't just point you to where it is, but this is basically our invitation to lawyers based on the North Star Pledge. So I'll put that in the chat, and thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely and nice to be in community with all of you here on the screen and listening. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Pilar?
Thank you also for this invitation. And I just hope we continue to plant seeds and grow this movement for religious and spiritual freedom and protect it.
Thank you very much for being here and playing a part. The Reverend Hunt Priest. It's the first time I saw that title. I love it.
That's a mouthful. So Hunt Priest, the organization is Ligare. Again, the root word for to bind or unite and religion, ligare.org. My email address is hunt@ligare.org. We have members in Canada, the US, Mexico, and in Europe. So we're building a network, we're educating, preparing for legal and safe opportunities for all people to have access to these sacred plants. Really an honor to be here with you all.
Thank you, Hunt. And Jonathan?
So we have now entered the 21st century. I'm happy to say. We do have a website, which I think has been up for like 2 weeks, because right in the Daime world we don't proselytize, but the people want to find us. We do have a website. It's chlq.org, Church of the Holy Light of the Queen.org, and it is actually functioning. As are we. We managed to find a way to function actually through the whole pandemic. So we are open, and we're very limited in how we're taking new people, and we're being very judicious about how we go about that, just based on health things.
Beautiful.
Coming, right? And I am very grateful. I'm very grateful for this circle. I've learned a lot, which I like doing very much. And I have lots of respect for what everybody's doing. It's right. Freedom is good. Freedom is good. And so those of us who are here are participating in the liberation of humanity in our own little ways, right? And as I say very often, what we're doing ain't much, but it ain't nothing. So I'm very honored. I'm honored to be among you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pilar?
Sorry, last minute. I just want to share that I am a part of leading and organizing 2 different training programs. One is a more traditional program from my institution, Lewis and Clark College, Grad School Continuing Education. And also with my colleagues, we're creating a program for everybody, not only for therapists. And this is called Earth Medicine Center, and we will have a website up very soon.
Beautiful. Thank you for letting us know, and I hope to learn more about that. So, John, thank you very much for putting this all together. This has been amazing. These videos will go live on YouTube soon. Somehow the recording broke, so I'll have to do some real fixing. So the first half and the second half will be on YouTube separately, but sooner than later, there'll be one video. So stay tuned. Please share. Please get active politically in Oregon and elsewhere. The fact that people are still going to prison for practicing their religion is unbelievable, or at least putting themselves at risk. So please do get loud, get active. John, any closing thoughts or remarks?
I just want to say thank you, Joe, again, and to Psychedelics a Day for creating the forum and the space to have these conversations. I just think they're so critically important, and we need to be having more of them. And I hope folks, and thank you everyone who came today, both on the panel and also in the public. This is just such an important conversation, and I hope people will share this and continue these conversations. And like you said, Joe, get loud, speak out. I mean, there's 2 meetings coming up this week where Oregon will be considering whether to do this, and so they reserve time to hear from the public. So if people don't show up and we don't get it, then it's really up to us to demand it and to show that this is important to the people of Oregon. So please everyone do their part, whatever that means. It looks like different things, but if this matters to you, I'd encourage everyone to weigh in this week.
All right, everybody, until next time, you'll see John and I in 2 weeks. Thank you all panelists for being here, and thank you all for watching. Have a beautiful rest of your night. Bye-bye.